Spring has arrived and most producers have turned cows and calves out to pasture, and life for many of us seems just a bit easier. Now we need to turn our attention to considering calf management during the grazing season to keep calves healthy and gaining at an optimal rate so we can have heavy, high-quality calves at weaning time. Welcome to this edition of the Beef Roundtable. I'm Dr. Ron Lumenager, Beef Extension Specialist at Purdue University in West Lafayette, Indiana. The Beef Roundtable is recorded live and edited to fit the time constraints of the program. The programs are available at the Beef Magazine website, youtube.com, as well as www.beefroundtable.com.
And I'm Bert Rutherford, Senior Editor of Beef Magazine in Amarillo, Texas. Our first guest today is Lisa Peterson. Lisa's been the Beef Quality Assurance Specialist with North Dakota State University's Extension Service and at NDSU's Dickinson Research Extension Center since 1999. Lisa earned a bachelor's degree from Colorado State University, home of the Rams, where she dual majored in ag business and animal science. And she earned her master's degree in farm and ranch management and livestock production. Livestock production really is in Lisa's genetics. She's the fourth generation raised on her family's cow, calf, and sheep operation, located near the southwestern Colorado town of Durango. Lisa's married to Chad, and they raised registered and commercial red Angus on Chad and commercial and registered quarter horses on Chad's family ranch in north central South Dakota near Firestone. Lisa works with producers and youth of all ages to teach them about the importance of producing the safest, highest quality, and most consumer-friendly, consumer-acceptable business. Lisa has been recognized as the 2016 National Cattlemen's Beef Association's DQA Educator of the Year.
Our second guest is Dr. Larry Hollis, DVM. Larry is a graduate of Texas A&M University College of Veterinary Medicine. Dr. Hollis spent 4 years in private practice, first as an employee and later as a clinic owner in the Texas Panhandle, where he was heavily involved with cow, calf, and stocker production medicine and feedlot consultation. He received a Master's of Agriculture degree in Beef Management and Nutrition from West Texas A&M and worked as a technical service veterinarian for Syntax Animal Health and Pfizer Animal Health, and then became the extension educator in beef veterinary medicine at Kansas State University in 2002. Dr. Hollis recently retired from Kansas State University and moved to Tyler, Texas, where he is a private beef health management consultant.
Larry and Lisa, let's begin our discussion by identifying what you think are the health issues that producers need to consider for their nursing calves and their stocker calves once they get them turned out on grass.
My major concern would be just looking ahead to when we're getting ready to wean them. But anywhere during the growing phase, we can have pneumonia problems in these calves. And we could also, might still have some remnants of scours. But my major concern is with pneumonia. With summer pneumonia, while they're still on the cow, and with pneumonia occurring when we wean them, especially in retained ownership, preconditioning type situations.
I would agree with Dr. Hollis. I think some major issues that cow-calf producers need to be thinking about are maybe some local issues as well as to the pneumonia type issues. Here in the Dakotas, Saskatchewan, clear into Texas, we deal with anthrax often, starting about this time of year. And so, if you're in an area that anthrax is prevalent, maybe we need to be thinking about anthrax vaccination as well, looking for some water issues. And really, I think we need to think ahead to the end goal. Are you going to wean those calves on a truck, sell them straight off the cow, and or are you going to background those cattle? And I think your situation and your management dictates a lot in how you deal with issues that may come ahead. And certainly in many areas looking at pink eye and foot rot as well.
What about Clostridia? You know, some producers vaccinate when they go to grass, some producers hold off. Comment about Clostridia.
I think Clostridials are one of the classes of organisms that we need to vaccinate against routinely. I like to do it as part of our calf foot vaccination program as we're going to grass. They're going to pick the spores up off of grass. That's where the spores reside. And we have very good vaccines that work very well. And we should basically never lose a calf to blackleg, one of the Clostridial organisms, just because of the vaccine. It's effective, it's cheap, and it works. The timing
You
is
see,
everything. We need to be there ahead of when they're going to get exposed, and so that's when are they going to be eating grass alongside mother.
do you see Clostridia popping up more whenever you see a significant change in weather? You know, we're for the 2016 season. You know, it looks like we may have some dry weather ahead of us during the grazing season. You know, as we go from a wet spring to a dry summer, do you see it pop up more in, you know, when you change drastically in weather or not?
Part of it has to do with how long the grass is. And so with the weather they're predicting this year, the La Nina effect, we're going to run out of grass or we're going to be grazing it shorter and closer to the ground. That's where the spores are, in the dirt. And so it stands to reason that in a dry year, a drought year especially, we're going to see more Clostridial problems and more anthrax problems as far as that goes too, because that's also a spore-forming bacteria, and the spores are in the dirt on the place. And the more dirt the calves have to eat to get a bite of grass, the more spores they stand a chance to pick up.
Dr. Hollis, here in the Dakotas in particular, lots of producers give a clostridial vaccine at calving time, at birth. Is there a need to booster that, maybe at, say, branding time or someplace at turnout time down the road, or is it a one and done deal?
Unfortunately, it is not a one and done deal. With any of our killed bacterians, which our Clostridial products are all killed, it takes 2 doses. The first one is the priming dose, and the second one is the one that really confers a significant amount of protection. You may get a little bit from the first one, but it's marginal. And there are a lot of people that think one and done is it, and they're just very fortunate that they're not seeing bigger problems than they are.
Lisa, from a BQA perspective, as producers are looking forward to working their calves at branding and giving them a calf foot vaccination at that time, what are a couple of things that folks need to keep in mind?
You know, I think first of all, handling your vaccines correctly. And in the Dakotas, especially in the western Dakotas and in the high plains and mountainous areas, big ranch areas, oftentimes we have what I call rope and drag brandings and workings. And, you know, I see vaccines sit out on top of coolers and, you know, on the ground, and they're exposed to heat and sunlight. And we know that temperature changes in sunlight are very detrimental to the efficacy of vaccines. So, you know, we have a big effort here in our state to make sure that producers handle those vaccines right when they're working cattle. So make sure that they're held in a cooler at a correct temperature, not too cold, not too hot, and then shielded from sunlight. And then the thing that I encourage my producers to do is to color code those products. And so make sure every calf gets what they need and not 2 of some and none of another. And which is easy enough to have happen, say a large rope and drag branding where lots of people are giving shots. And so certainly be sure to give those injections in the neck and follow the label instructions. If they need to be given subcutaneously, give those products sub-Q, or if they need to be given IM or intranasal, give them the way that they're labeled to give so that they'll work the best for you and your investment pays off.
And the keeping them in the cooler is particularly important for those modified live products. Is that right?
I think that, you know, from what I understand in the research that I read, that the modified lives are particularly more sensitive to temperature change, particularly after they're mixed. And one of the things that I encourage producers to do is to buy vaccines in smaller dosage bottles. And so instead of buying a 50 dose bottle, maybe we buy a 10 or 20 dose bottle so that we are potentially exposing fewer doses to the elements that may impact their efficacy that way. And I know at our own ranch we buy vaccine in 10 dose bottles so that we don't waste any at the end of the day, or we waste potentially less.
One of the things that I had to with your modified live viral vaccine is they're super susceptible to sunlight. So the situation where we reconstitute the vaccine, and if they on the tailgate pickup, and that's our working desk that we call our supplies, you'll kill, if you leave a modified live viral vaccine out there in direct sunlight, the direct sunlight will inactivate over 60% of the modified live virus particles in that bottle in 1 hour. And so you're already, with some of the vaccines, you're already underdosed at the end of an hour. And for sure, if you go 2 hours, it's basically you're injecting water with a few dead viral particles in there, and it'll never work for you.
The other thing that I have really worked hard to teach producers here is that we should not use disinfectants on our needles. And some of those guys just try to be so clean and I think so sanitary that they have it in their head that they should disinfect the needle between every animal. And that really is hard on all of our vaccines. Those disinfectants can decrease the efficacy significantly. And so I always tell our producers, I appreciate the fact that you want to be clean and do things right, but please don't disinfect your needles with a chemical disinfectant.
Do you have any recommendations on how many animals you vaccinate with a single needle?
In the Guinness World Book of Records, it's probably thousands. And there are people out there who have attempted to set that record and beat the existing record that's there. That's one of the worst things that we can do, is to use a needle repeatedly. It's the second worst thing. The worst thing is to go into a bottle of product with a dirty needle that just came out of an animal. You go right back into the bottle, thereby potentially contaminating all the rest of that product. Doesn't matter what it is. It's an antibiotic. You contaminate it using that dirty needle going into the bottle. So we have several needle-related issues here.
I've heard it said, don't vaccinate more than, or inject more than 10 animals, with a single needle. Is that a rule of thumb that anybody follows?
I'd say there are a lot of people that follow that, and I'll also tell you that in a study that we did at Kansas State University on anaplasmosis, with one needle, we could transfer the anaplasm organisms to 6 out of the next 10 animals. So you better take into consideration what diseases do I deal with in my part of the world before you try to set that new record.
Good point. Dr. Hollis, you mentioned earlier respiratory and summer pneumonia. So what organisms would you recommend if that happens, okay, or if you're in an area where summer pneumonia has been an issue, what organisms would you vaccinate for?
Well, there's two answers to that question, or two parts of the answer. One of them is the bacteria, and we're looking at Pasteurella multocida and Mannheimia hemolytica. Those are the two big ones. As you go further north in the country and up into Canada, Haemophilus somnus, or Histophilus somni, they call it now, that appears to be a bigger part of the picture as well. We don't have so much of that down south. We have some, but not enough that I would consider vaccinating for it here. I would defer to my northern colleagues as far as do they need it up there. But those are the three organisms, the two for sure, Pasteurella multocida and Mannheimia hemolytica, that you need to be concerned about. And so whether I have those in the vaccination program or not, they may have a chance to work, they may not have a chance to work, depending on which type of product you have. especially with Mannheimia hemolytica, you have to have the leukotoxoid fraction in that thing to protect against the leukotoxin that Mannheimia produces. If you don't have that, you really don't have a vaccine that can do you much good. So the vaccines, I'd leave that up to the local veterinarians as far as what they see and what they need to protect against. But usually you consider both of those. A second thing, and something that I'm seeing more of all the time, is the number of animals that are short on trace minerals, the number of calves that are deficient in trace minerals, and their immune system can't work to either fight disease or to respond to vaccines if they don't have adequate trace minerals. And this all goes back to not what are we doing to the calf, but what are we doing to their mother, so that the mother can pass adequate trace minerals to the calf before it's born. After it's born, the calf isn't going to pick up trace minerals from the milk. It's not going to be eating mineral with its mom or anything until it gets larger. And if that pasture is already deficient in trace minerals, or there are antagonists out there to those trace minerals, when that calf does start eating grass, he's going to be in the same position his mother was in. So one of the things I'd sure consider is, if you're having trouble with summer pneumonia, is make doggone sure that your trace mineral program works well. If not, I would sure look at an injectable trace mineral as a possible solution to this thing. That's something you can do to the calf at birth, or you can do that when we're branding, or you can do out when we're weaning if you need to almost instantly bring their mineral status up.
Let me do a follow-up question on that. I've heard some veterinarians say that pneumonia and some of the respiratory problems that we see is really largely dictated by the viruses, with the bacterial infections being secondary infections. Can you comment on that? I mean, do you need to make sure that if you're going to add, the Pastorella and others, do you also have to have a good viral vaccine program along with that?
A lot of that is determined by the risk factors that each different operation faces. I like having the viral vaccines in there. They do predispose to the bacterial problems that we mentioned earlier. So the two go hand in glove on this deal. I think there may be some situations in some isolated ranches that don't bring in new livestock where there's enough of a closed herd effect that they might not have to use the virals. But as a general recommendation, I do want to use the respiratory viral vaccines. And my preference, if it's where we can, and that all is predicated upon the vaccination status of the cow herd, is I would like to use modified live respiratory virus vaccines in these calves at branding time.
Excellent. Are there any other management practices that producers should consider to optimize calf weaning weights?
I don't know whether creep feeding optimizes calf weaning weights, but I'm a fan of creep feeding for its ability to improve weaning time for the calves. I think it's a great stewardship practice. I can tell you that in our own herd, we have a commercial set of cows and a registered set of cows that run side by side in side-by-side pastures. And we creep feed our commercial calves, and we do not creep feed our registered cattle. And in the last 7 years, we've not treated a single commercial calf at weaning time, and we have treated registered cattle. And they are on the same nutrition program, the same animal health program, and I think we do not give enough credit to creep feeding and the ease of weaning and the stewardship that I think it improves in our cattle. And I'm sure that we get improved weaning weight off of creep feeding. I think every study shows that. I think if your only goal is to improve weaning weight, maybe you need to look at the cost of gain and the products that you're using. But I think as professionals in the beef industry, we really need to talk about some of the side things that might come with creep feeding, including that improved ability at weaning time for calves to stay healthy.
And Lisa, you might be able to accomplish that by just creep feeding the last 30 days prior to weaning.
Absolutely, I think so. You know, I recently passed a pasture in the last week that those calves were born in February sometime, and they already have creep feed out. And I had mentioned that to my husband. I thought that maybe they had started that practice a little bit early, but you know, I think we can accomplish that stewardship effect, or that improved in ease of weaning and improved health at weaning time if we creep feed, say, in the last month ahead of weaning.
The data would also suggest that creep-fed calves, particularly if you're retaining ownership or you're trying to sell high-quality carcass cattle, that marbling may be improved by creep feeding. And so you're resetting the pre-adipocyte cells that will ultimately become marbling tissue. So there's a couple different options here, I think, for creep feeding that producers need to at least give some consideration to.
I would agree with that.
What about implants? Any comments about implants on calves during that nursing phase, or even the stocker phase for that matter?
I'll make a comment there. Is if unless somebody is paying you more not to do it, then you should be implanting your calves to pick up that extra gain. I'm talking here about steer calves and heifer calves that you know are not going to be kept back as replacement animals. But it's all about the money. If there's not somebody paying you more to leave them alone, then implant them. The gains are huge. Performance is huge, and it's one of those things that puts money in the producer's pocket and produces more pounds of beef.
Larry, I think you mentioned something about the non-replacement heifers. Comment about the replacement heifers, and Lisa, join in here in a minute.
I like this from research that's been done in the past. There's mixed results on the replacement heifers, but it seems to me that all the research points that the earlier you do it, the more chance you have of having a negative effect upon the females. And so if I know I'm going to keep them for replacement, I would just as soon not mess with those. I want to see what those, what kind of mothers they can make on their own, how successful they breed on their own. I'll forego a few extra pounds, which, affects the onset of puberty, but I want her to show me what kind of mother she can be genetically. So I'm going to leave that off of there, so I don't take a chance on fouling up the uterine wall, the cells in the wall, which there's been some tests or research done to show that you do alter the glandular structure of the endometrium, and if you do implant, and especially the younger you implant. If you do implant heifers, do not implant below 30 days of age. Just do not do it. If you've got heifers there and they're going to be less than that, go ahead and implant them, because they're probably not going to make your replacements anyway. And so they're going to be over on your feeder side, so go ahead and implant them, but mark so that you know not to keep them as a replacement, because they may look better by the time they grow up and you make your heifer selections.
As a general rule, I recommend to producers that they don't implant heifers on the cow, just for the simple fact that, for one, when they leave your ranch after they're sold or somebody else buys them, you don't know what those people are going to do with those heifers. And our reputation is everything in the livestock business and the cattle business. And, secondly, as Dr. Hollis said, you may have those heifers then looking pretty good, and a lapse of mind is that we forgot we implanted them and then end up with a wreck on our hands. I have a question for Dr. Hollis and anybody else, and it's a question I received from a producer earlier this week. So he is wondering if he should implant his calves if we're looking at a drought situation, and he's wondering if there's enough energy for that implant to work at its maximum level.
I'd say he's asking the exact question he should be asking. I think most of the research, if you go back and look at it related to implants, If the calves don't have the groceries available to them to gain at least a pound a day, and for sure at least 3/4 of a pound a day, you can actually hurt the cattle with the implants. It increases their basal metabolic rate, and you can screw things up if they run out of groceries. An implant does not replace groceries. You got to have the groceries first for the implant to work.
And I would agree with that. That would be my recommendation as well, is that if you've got a poor performing animal or an environment that creates poor performance, then an implant can actually be a negative. And the other thing that I would add is that, we talked a little bit about, these heifers might look a little bit better, particularly at weaning if they've been implanted. The problem is that by the time they get to be a yearling, okay, any growth advantage due to the implant has probably been lost. And if so, you've paid for an implant, you got a little bit more performance up to weaning time, but you retain her until a yearling, and the advantage is gone, and you have the potential negative effect on reproduction. I've seen a set of heifers that were implanted, they were cycling, but virtually none of them conceived. Okay, and that probably goes back to the endometrium and the uterine glands and that kind of thing. So it can't support a pregnancy. And that's not 100%, obviously. There will be some heifers that will and some heifers that won't. But I think you run the risk of having a negative effect on reproduction.
Lisa and Larry, going back to our vaccination programs, are there any rule of thumbs that you can think of for producers to use regarding timing of calf vaccinations and then management practices?
Well, in an ideal world, timing is everything, and you want to have them vaccinated, and vaccinated at a level that will protect them, i.e. with your kill products, 2 injections, prior to the exposure or the challenge to those organisms that you're vaccinating against. And that's a perfect world. We don't live in a perfect world, but timing is always crucial to put if the vaccine is going to have a chance to benefit you, it has to be put into the animals ahead of the insult, ahead of the challenge, for it to have a chance to work. You can put it in too late. So timing's like rain dancing. Man, if you do it when it's right, you look good.
One of the things I consistently remind producers is that the worst thing maybe you can do for our vaccinations, other than mishandling them due to heat and sunlight, or temperature abuse and sunlight, is to vaccinate those calves as they get on a truck to be marketed. And so whether you're marketing directly off the ranch or you're selling through an auction market or however that is, vaccinating those calves as they get on the truck is not a good principle. We know that weaning time and handling time are increased stress times in cattle, in all animals' lives, even humans. And so if we increase that stress, we are not giving that investment in our vaccine the best opportunity to work the way it should. And so I encourage producers to kind of think in almost a year-round calendar. And so think about, what is our end goal? And if our end goal is that we're going to sell these calves off the cow, which is fine, not everybody has the opportunity or the ability to wean cattle at their operation. I think we need to be looking far enough ahead at when we're going to market those calves to be sure that we have a good vaccination protocol in them. And, we should be doing the same when we wean at home. It's just at home we probably have a whole lot less commingling and potentially a lot less stress. And so I really encourage producers to think about that year-round schedule. What's our end goal? And really the end goal for all of us should be is having a healthy animal at the end of the day that either is a really good mama cow or produces a really good carcass on the rail and gains well in a feed yard. And those should be our end goals. And so how we achieve those, I think we need to think in a broader picture than just the next month or even the next 2 months. Maybe it's a little bit wider than that.
Lisa, I'm glad you brought up the issue of weaning, because you made me think of it earlier and then I forgot. But I'm a big advocate of soft weaning methods, particularly fence line weaning. so that we can reduce stress, the stress of weaning, which is the biggest stress after they're born. It's the biggest stress on a calf's life. And so if we can use a soft weaning method, fence line weaning, or the nose flap weaning method, either one of those pays huge dividends in getting that animal weaned before they put him on the truck. I hate truck on the way to town weaning. It gives our industry a black eye. It is not the way we need to be doing things.
I would agree with that. I think we have a lot of opportunities to improve our weaning management in this industry, and especially, I'm fortunate enough to live close enough to Canada and see their innovations in weaning, and they really, I think, have come up with some very unique, good ideas for improving weaning on ranches. And I think they're strategies that we don't need a huge set of corrals, and we don't need a bunk line feeding system and all the rest of that. I think they're just some really nice opportunities. I have a producer, in fact, now that is weaning his calves out on corn stalks. His heifer calves, he's keeping them back. He runs those cows and calves out on the corn stalks until they're a little bit older. Then he pulls those cows in to the corral, which is not what we'd normally think about doing, I think. And he leaves those calves out on corn stalks, and those calves are so used to eating on those stalks that he has had virtually zero sickness, very little bawling, and very little stress. And I think it's a very unique way to look at weaning. And I think we need to start looking outside the box a little bit at our weaning strategies, Dr. Hollis.
Hey, any last comments either of you might have, or take-home messages that you think are important for our producers on calf management as we head into grazing season?
Just pray for rain.
I would agree. I think producers, it's a nice time for us to look at our whole herd management. And so maybe looking at those parasite loads, and I get lots of calls here in about a month on dealing with flies and some of those fly management strategies. I encourage producers to have that visit with their veterinarian. I think we have some technologies today that will work well if we use them appropriately and judiciously. I think one of the things that we fail to talk about is our herd bull health and vaccination protocol, because they're with those calves almost as long as their mothers are in some cases. And so I think we need to think long term about preventatively vaccinating those herd sires that come into our herds the same way we would our cows and calves, and having that discussion with our herd veterinarians as well. And then think about biosecurity. And I think that's one of the major reasons why we need to visit with our veterinarians about our herd health plan. In the last 5 years, we've moved a lot of cattle in this country. I think Texas lost millions of head of cows. A lot of those came north into the Dakotas. And even though they were probably quote unquote disease-free, no animals are disease-free. We all carry some disease. And so I think we need to have maybe a good discussion with our practitioners about our whole herd health plan for the year, so that we can optimize our vaccinations and our preventative health plan and have the healthiest cattle that we absolutely can.
That about wraps up this edition of the Beef Roundtable. Bert and I would like to thank our guests Lisa Peterson and Dr. Larry Hollis for their insight into calf management during the grazing season. Please join us again next month for another Beef Roundtable discussion. It's going to be a great program. Until next time, Bert and I hope you have a safe and rewarding month.